tempting to just laugh it off when you see the Daily Express writing about World War III, but you've got Germany's defence minister, Boris Pistorius, it's a cool name, saying 5 to 8 years possibly before some form of engagement with Russia. And then you've got the Dutch head of NATO's military committee suggesting that the possibility of war with Russia within the next 20 years would see the whole of society get involved, whether we like it or not. And I suppose, in a way, the question of why this is happening now has been answered. It's happening now because it's been slowly percolating. It's been slowly escalating. These concerns have been expressed, and the situation in Ukraine has hardened them. And for me, as an amateurish observer, for me, the possibility of someone who is absolutely not committed to the NATO settlement becoming the president of the United States of America again would really focus the mind. Not least because I don't think that it is necessarily controversial to suggest that Donald Trump often seems to be more aligned with the interests of Vladimir Putin than he does with the interests of your average American voter. Bless their little cotton socks. I think there was a historian, was it Francis Fukuyama, who said that history had ended. And by that he meant there won't be any more wars. We'd reached a sort of a position of peace, and that clearly that ship has sailed, obviously. But the sort of attitude of Western, particularly Britain, perhaps in the last 20 years, has been, we don't really need to worry about all that kind of stuff. It's not as if there's ever going to be another world war. Is there? I'll tell you what would be quite useful, given the conversation that we've been having. Imagine if we had some sort of European army. Wouldn't that be a good thing? So that all of the allies in Europe would be united against a foe like Russia, and they could operate without necessarily being beholden to a changing of the guard at the White House. If European allies, obviously a trading bloc would be a wonderful thing to be part of, but if there was some sort of military force that managed to shrug off American patronage and therefore address these issues independently of America, where the next president might well be a Vladimir Putin lapdog. That would be great, wouldn't it? Do you know, of all the nonsense that Brexit introduced into public discourse, the European army was one of the things I struggled most to understand. Farage was always belching on about it, and as if it was some terrible thing. I presume it's some sort of commando comic post-war hangover, is it? We can't be in the same army as the people we once fought against, which demonstrates such an incredible ignorance of history. Genuinely incredible ignorance of history, to think that because you fought a war against a country 50 years ago, you couldn't possibly be on the same side in the next war. We were on Iraq's side in the Iran-Iraq war. And then when they invaded Kuwait, we went and dropped bombs all over them. And these ideas are, we're talking about Farage. Of course, there's an absolute ignorance about almost anything complicated. But my view was always that the armies you're supposed to be worried about are generally not the ones you're in. So we've got to leave the European Union. There's going to be a European army. No one ever stopped to tell me why that would be a bad thing. Why would that be a bad thing? Something to do with foreigners, probably. That's where all Brexit breaks down, isn't it? It's something to do with foreigners, James. Yeah. Oh, okay, right. Listen, the way the media works is weird. I completely understand why stories that will provoke an enormous emotional reaction trump stories that are obviously and objectively much more important. But I can't believe how little coverage. In fact, I'm going to have to dig it out of the archives from yesterday. Can we find that article about us not being ready for the pandemic? Being less ready for another pandemic than we were ready for the last one. Just try that for size. Go on, take a moment now. Just put that on like a pair of socks. Try that story on for size. Where's your jaw now? You what, James? With less, but how? So it's just too big. We sit there to the sort of awed by the scale of that story. Do you see what I mean? You just go like, how do you even get started on something like that? And I feel a bit similar about this one, but get started we will. One of the interesting things about matters military is that there are quite a lot of people who have a deep and abiding interest in it. It's an area of genuine enthusiasm for people who have and have not done or are doing military service. Quite a lot of people do follow events as closely as we all should, and I'm relying on you if you're in that category today to help the rest of us out at least a little bit. But it is this story really that intrigues me most. It's this combination of senior military figures now warning that a war with Russia, and that would, to most intents and purposes, constitute a world war, is looking likely, I think. There's another one. The Army Chief General Sir Patrick Sanders has called for preparatory steps to enable placing our societies on a war footing. He also warned that civilians would have to volunteer for the front line if Russia began invading NATO countries. And Gabby Hinsliff writes in The Guardian today, not knowing what was going to appear in the Times, she says at least he stopped short of calling for the reintroduction of conscription. And then I turn to the Times newspaper and I read a former NATO chief suggesting that we might have to have conscription. He says, to most professional soldiers, myself included, conscription is anathema. However, if deterrence is to be effective, Russia deterred and catastrophe averted, it might be necessary. So I think the question is what's going on. It's a Marvin Gaye morning once again, but we need a little bit more focus than that, perhaps. How has this happened? As someone who follows these matters perhaps more closely than I do, how has this happened and why is this happening now? I'm not completely stupid. I can see how the aggression on display in Ukraine is pertinent to the bigger picture, but it has been widely regarded, at least in the opening salvos, as fairly catastrophic for Putin. The expectation of a swift and decisive victory was scotched in the course of the first weekend. Where is it coming from, this fear? And how, do you know, actually, I've got to apologise to somebody. A pal of mine was over from Australia, literally just changing flights at Heathrow, and came into Hammersmith for lunch. I haven't seen her for ages. And quite a lot of people convened upon this pub in Hammersmith to break bread with her. But we didn't all know each other. And one of the people there who works on the entertainment side of television said, I was so glad when I heard you were coming because I really want to know how worried I should be about World War III. And I thought she was bonkers. It turns out she was actually paying more attention to the news than I was. This is only about a week ago. In fact, it may even have been a week ago today. And so that idea that this conversation is already unfolding in spaces. Gabby Hinsliff's piece in The Guardian today talks about cyber warfare. What would happen to the country if somehow they succeeded in switching stuff off? How long could you survive without your mobile phone? And you know, everything is in your mobile phone these days, from your bank account to your route home. So what is going on? Why are all of these voices convening on the same space? Why do you think that is?